Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, AJ Matthew.
That's
AJ?
me.
So there's a term that we like to use for the overflow of ministries that sometimes occurs in churches. It occurs in most churches, actually. We call them secondary ministries. These are ministries that you don't expect everyone to participate in, like you would expect everyone to go to the worship service. We would call that a primary ministry. But you wouldn't expect everyone to go to the chili cook-off. That would be a secondary ministry, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the challenge is, lots of times, churches, we've talked about this on the podcast before, the churches tend to accumulate ministries a lot like people accumulate junk in their garage or clothes in their closet that they haven't worn in a long time, right? So things tend to just pile up and clutter up, and that becomes a problem. So today what we're talking about is really defining this problem of secondary ministries. In particular, we want to attack why it is such a problem, because we see churches all the time, AJ, that they go, oh yeah, less is more, but then they can't cut themselves off from all of the things that they've accumulated.
Yeah.
So we're going to dive into that problem a little bit, and then we're going to give some practical solutions on things you can do to help move away from all of those secondary ministries and get healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there we go. Yeah, I mean, the old less is more adage applies nicely to the church, that doing less, we can accomplish more out of discipleship of our people. And that's what we're here to be working on. So let's dive into, we got a few points here, defining the problem, or kind of, looking at the problem from a few facets of why it should be a concern of yours as a leader in the church. And then we'll get into what we can do about that. So,
before we get into the problems, wait a minute. Before we get into problems, maybe let's just holler and give a shout out to the book. It's called, if you're watching on the YouTube video version of the podcast, you're seeing me holding up the book here. But for those of you just listening, there's a book called Strategic Disciple Making, a practical tool for successful ministry by Dr. Malphurs, Dr. Aubrey Malphurs, our founder. And this topic and the article that you will be able to read at malphursgroup.com/155 is adapted from, what chapter number was this, AJ, in the book? Chapter 8 in this book. So just shout out to Aubrey. Thank you to him for writing this, obviously. But if you're interested in this topic generally of disciple making, how can our church get better at disciple making, might I kind of send you to this book. It's not a long read, and it would definitely, there's a lot of practical advice in here, some of which we're going to talk about today. So just wanted to give a shout out to the book before we hop into the topic.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, all right, secondary ministries. So Scott kind of mentioned primary ministries. We want everybody doing those things. Primary ministries should be very strategic and intentional and very limited to accomplish particular goals of discipleship in the church. Secondary ministries should support primary ministries or feed into them. But as is the case in many churches, they're just out of control and just they lack intentionality. It's not that they were intentionally vague to begin with. It's that strategy was not the focus of leadership, likely when those were being developed to begin with. It seemed like a good idea at the time, and it may have been. But a church that is really trying to be focused on discipleship, staying on mission, has to be intent in investigating what they do. You have to make sure there's a point to things and that it's actually working to accomplish your goals. And when it's not, secondary ministries need to be on the chopping block or up for change. Our first concern in the problem, number one, is that secondary ministries become a distraction, not an attraction. And the philosophy in a lot of the development of these ministries is, hey, maybe we feel like we have a gap. Maybe we don't. Maybe we're just like not even thinking this is going to fill a void. It's just, this seems like something people would like to do. Let's start doing it. And there, may have been a little bit of anecdotal evidence that would be supported. And back in the day when it was started, maybe it was even well attended. You need to look now and decide for yourselves whether, that's truly the case anymore or not. But just the idea that adding something would make it attractive is a falsehood that we need to not just assume. We need to always be intent about what we're doing and creating ministries to serve particular goals in the church, not just because it seems good. Because the opposite effect, at least in modern generation, having just tons and tons of choices in the church doesn't mean that everybody will just find something attractive to them, get plugged in, and it will be a successful ministry.
Yeah, let me explain how this normally goes down, because we deal with this a lot when we're working with churches one-on-one. So we'll recognize a common problem. Like we'll look at the church and it's an aging church. The church is, 60, most people are 65 plus, and they'll say, we don't really have any young families, or we don't have any young people. And so they'll say, you know what, we just need to start a young adult ministry, or we need to start a college ministry. And they think that if we just start that ministry, then we will attract those people. And that is a way to, as the kids would say, that's a big dose of cope that you're trying to take that's not actually solving the problem. So if we launch a college ministry, or we launch a coffee cafe service, or we do something like that, but we aren't dealing with the underlying problems for why young people didn't want to be at your church in the first place, then it's unlikely to actually address that core problem. All you've done is you've added a ministry. So you've continued to distract from what's most important, and you aren't even attracting the people that you thought you would. So that's generally how this happens, AJ, is someone goes, we see this problem in the church, therefore we can address that problem by starting a new ministry targeted at that problem, without doing the hard work of uncovering why that problem exists in the first place. Mm-hmm. And a lack of a ministry is rarely the root cause. Now, does that mean you should never have a young adult ministry or a college ministry or any of that? Of course not. But those things should flow naturally out of something more fundamental and deeper, not as a Band-Aid to a much deeper infection within the church.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great example. And yeah, so to be sure, because I think we do have a fair amount of audience who might be even in that situation. They're like, okay, what are we going to do then, Scott? We want to start attracting college age or young adults and all that.
That's a different episode
today to get into all of those details.
Let's talk about that.
But starting a college ministry may be part of that strategy, but the bigger point is we need to figure out what other groundwork do we need to lay in the church before we launch a college ministry.
I don't want to get stuck here for too long, but I do want to just why would you think that would fix it?
Yeah.
If you've got a bunch of 65-year-olds in the room, there's no one who's even, or barely anyone who's under 35. And you go, we're going to start a college ministry. For who? How are they just going to magically discover it? The college kids, do they have a radar on their heads? It's like, oh, this church down the street just launched a college ministry. Now I know about it. That's not how any of this works. And so that's why now you've invested resources and time and attention and all of this into starting something that's destined to fail, but then you feel like you can't quit it because we just started it. And do you see what I'm saying? That's why these things accumulate, is
and why they are a distraction.
That's right.
Yeah. So and that ends up being a really good example, because our second point here, confusion, not clarity, is part of the problem. Would be more so in line in the situation with you are or a demographic that you presently have. So, maybe we've got, a variety of age demographics in the church, and we feel like, okay, we need to start something else for people that we already have. And that's where confusion and not clarity can come in, because maybe then you're like, okay, well, we already have something that's kind of similar to that, or we have something that we should be looking at as a primary ministry, but instead we're just going to start something else because maybe we're saying, gosh, we don't have that many people, in Sunday school or in our small groups or whatever it is. Let's start a Bible study. For some reason, people don't want to go to what we're already doing. Let's create something new that maybe they do want to go to, instead of
Right.
considering why are they not going to something that we already offer and what maybe needs to be changed about that. So adding secondary ministries can create confusion then, because then people are like, okay, well, you wanted me to go to this last year, still have it, and now we have something new. What? And I think that's a question a lot of people, but probably think in the church a lot. The more we add secondary ministries, is what exactly am I supposed to be doing? Where should I really be spending my time? Because that's a very limited resource that we've got to recognize as leaders and strategize towards maximizing the time that we have with people.
Yeah, there's an irony here. And I'm gonna maybe I'll tie this in with the third point. So the third point is that the secondaries ministries increase complexity, not simplicity. So these 2 points are really tied in closely together. We've talked about this. I mean, this was a long time ago on the podcast, but I wish I remembered what episode number it was. But there is something ironic that the more that you add, the more you have to add. So if I start adding age specific things, this is a class for young marrieds, all right, well, I think I even said this when we talked about this the last time. I'm 36. So, I mean, I'm young compared to some people, but I wouldn't consider myself a young married. I mean, my son is almost 10 years old. My daughter is 7. There are people who I would think young married, like someone who just got married, they don't have kids yet or something, so I'm in a completely different phase of life. But I also, I mean, would I consider myself middle aged? Probably not. Like, so the more that you get specific on age ranges, the more you have to make, because the more people go, well, which category do I fit in? Am I young married? What am I? So it creates its own problem. And then layer on top of that, a lot of this is a historical thing, and I apologize if I'm stepping on anyone's toes or hurting feelings, but a lot of times these Sunday school classes have cutesy names: bridge builders, sunshine followers, and you don't know what any of that means.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. And is it open? Is it closed? So the more that you add, the more it confuses. The more that you have, the more complex it is, and the more likely people are to just completely disengage, especially people who are my age. When you have someone who is older, who's looking for a new church, they're going to put in the effort to find something and connect. When you're talking about people who are millennials and younger, they're like, this is ridiculous, confusing, and annoying. I got enough on my plate. A hard pass. That's what happens. So then we go, oh, we don't have any young people. So then what do we do, AJ? We go, let's start a young adult ministry, and the cycle continues, right? So just keep that in mind. The more that you add, the more that you have to add. The more targeted and specific it is, the more you have to feed that beast. And I just say, get out of that game altogether.
Yeah. Yeah. So confusion loses out every time. So clarity in really what people should be doing. And then we kind of bleed it into number 3 here as well. Complexity is a problem instead of simplicity. This gets in, a lot of these, then with these sub ministries as well. So we already were like, well, we better launch a men's ministry. What does that even mean? I mean, that in and of itself isn't even a thing. So inside that, it's a package, it's a box, it's a bucket that we start dumping.
We have events, we have Bible studies, we have, we have a men's retreat.
I just dealt with this with a church recently, I mean, because every church seems to have this, most men's ministry, women's ministry. When we start talking about building out a discipleship pathway, it gets thrown up, that name gets put up there. Yeah, we have a ministry, we have men's ministry. Great. What is that? What do they do? Well, it turns out there's 7 things. And, most recently I told a church, what we need to do? We need to throw away the bucket and take the stuff that's in the bucket, and those need to stand on their own. We can't just say we have men's ministry and then hide tons and tons of junk in the men's ministry bucket. So throw out the term. Let's pull these ministries out, and what validity do they have in helping people in discipleship? And we got to take these one at a time for what they are.
Mhm.
So we end up with this complexity of hidden ministries, because you might be able to put down on paper, yeah, look, we've got like 5 things that we do. Like, well, yeah, but one of those is an umbrella term, and it gets knee deep underneath that.
Yeah. Great point. Women's ministry is especially that way, because you start weeding into it. There's like the folks who can go to the thing, the women who don't have jobs, who go to a thing weekday in the morning. And that's a group of folks who sometimes have conflict. Like some women go, I have a job. I would love to go to a Bible study on Tuesday at 9 a.m. But guess what? I gotta be at my job. And then they get mad. And so then they start their own thing, and it's on Thursday nights at 7. And, and then they are all supposed to get together for tea, with a couple times a year. It's a big bucket of things that get thrown in there. So you're right. Yeah. Sometimes it's better to just talk about all those different components on their individual merits.
Yeah. Yep. Simplicity over complexity. All right. The 4th problem is with secondary ministries is that they diffuse energy instead of directing energy. And so again, these are very similar points, but I mean, consider the energy, use the word resources, whatever you want. You're finite. Your church is finite in its resources and in its energy. Mm-hmm. And the less we direct that towards the things of greatest impact and spread it out over multiple things. Look, I don't even need to finish the sentence. Where this thought goes to. This is like logic. This is physics. We will dilute down things. You cannot be amazing and excellent and intentional and goal-oriented over 50 things like you can over 5. And so we've got to get away from this. We've got to focus on the 5 high impact things that we can do well and should be doing well, and cut out the other stuff. It does not prove out to be of value. I think the results are in. We've had plenty of time to see how this works out. And if you're honest with yourself, look at these things. You might say, oh no, we don't have problems with any of this stuff. Look at it closely. You probably have got a few things to do really well, and then others that have low attendance. Maybe they're low resource things, but they're probably low attendance, low impact. And you collect 8 of those and get rid of them and see how much energy you regain, how many resources you regain to put into something else. So a bunch of 3%, 4% diffused energy situations added up equals a good chunk of time that your staff or your volunteers could be putting into something of greater impact, or even reducing your volunteer needs. But it's another topic.
The number of churches we deal with who go, oh man, we have people who are volunteering in 3, 4, 5 different areas. What's the return on that investment of their time and their energy? You're getting a lower quality version of that volunteer's effort in 3 different ministries versus getting the best out of their service, in one area or 2 at the most, which is actually a really good segue to then the final problem with these, which is that, and this is similar to number 4, but requiring staff and funding instead of freeing staff and funding. So as you've mentioned, you have limited resources as it relates to staff, both volunteer and paid, and limited just money. And I'm always surprised. Like, we're willing to string things along. I've worked with a number of churches lately. I can think of a few examples off the top of my head where things get to a point in the ministry where volunteers start just saying, "Oh, I'll pay for that." I mean, there's not money in the budget, so then people just kind of step up and go, "Oh, I'll just do that." And so we've got all of these various ministries on life support, and bless their hearts, literally, they're doing everything they can. It's not the volunteers' fault that these things are dying, and yet they're the ones who are putting in all the energy, the efforts. Very often they're the ones who are just bringing the snacks. They're paying for the things. They're bringing their resources. They're bringing their supplies, and the church leadership doesn't have the courage to cut it loose and to move on. And it can't get free from your past. You can't get free from your past enough to actually move towards a bold vision for the future. And it's just like it's like a spider web that's entangled these churches, and they cannot disentangle themselves from it for fear of hurting people's feelings. I mean, that's really at the bottom line why churches don't do these things, is we might hurt someone's feelings when we get rid of it. It isn't because it's so effective, AJ. It's not like, oh man, if we get rid of this, we're going to be losing our effectiveness. It's if we stop doing this, we'll hurt someone's feelings, or maybe we'll lose a donor or whatever. And so we're willing to long-term sabotage the future of the church, which, by the way, means we're long-term sabotaging our ability to reach people with the good news about Jesus. We'll sacrifice other people's eternities so that we won't hurt someone's feelings.
Ooh, man, you're twisting the knife.
It makes no sense to me. It's ludicrous. It's sinful in many cases. And that is a fearing man rather than fearing God type situation. I'm being maybe a little bit hyperbolic, but very often this is the kind of situation that we're dealing with.
Whew. All right. Cutting deep, Scott. Let's get into the solutions to this. This is already where we were headed. Number one, some ministries can be eliminated. So yeah, we probably don't need to belabor this point. It's kind of what we've been driving towards the last couple of minutes here. So you've got to have a plan, and if it doesn't fit into the plan, then let's move on from it. So I don't know if we need to go any deeper on this one.
Well, I mean, the only thing I'll add to it is just that there's a pastoral component to this. So the right decision could be to eliminate ministry, but the way in which you eliminate that ministry matters a lot. So you can do that in a way, you can do things in a way that minimizes that damage, right? Yeah. You have to be willing to accept that you may lose some people and you may hurt some feelings. That's tough cookies, right? But you don't have to do things in a way that aggravates that, right? So phase it out over the course of a year. Communicate with key stakeholders in that ministry long before you ever make an announcement. I mean, the worst thing you could do is make an announcement from the pulpit and never talk to the people who are directly involved in that ministry. So there's all kinds of practical things that you can do to minimize the damage, and hopefully rally the troops, so to speak, towards the future so that they feel comfortable and okay and positive about letting some things go. So, you got to be willing to do the hard thing, even though there might be consequences, but that doesn't mean you have to intentionally throw dynamite on the situation. So that's all I'd say, is have some emotional intelligence in knowing how to manage that change versus going, it has to be changed. And I see that mistake a lot. The gung-ho pastors, they go, well, it's just got to be this way. And they go in guns blazing, and that is stupid. You don't have to be a glutton for punishment. Okay.
There you go. That could be stupid.
Tweet
that. Number 2, make it difficult to start new ministries. This is a great one. There's some meat in this one. So we'll take a minute here and unpack this. But Okay, so kind of on the shallow end of the pool for making it difficult, little bit of red tape is okay. It doesn't need to be that anyone can do anything they want anytime they want. We should have levels of leadership. We should have authority. We should have policies. We should have processes for things. The other thing that makes it difficult to start new ministries is the fact that we have, as leaders, hopefully, if not, you need to have a structure in the church already. What is our process for discipling people into maturity? Then we have a framework. Then we've got places in which we do certain things. And if a new idea doesn't fit into the framework, it would have to answer to a ton of tough questions for it to be shoehorned in somewhere. Otherwise, it basically doesn't make it through. It doesn't run the gauntlet and make it out the other end alive. And this is the way we need to be considering things in the church. You mentioned before we went on, Scott, some of the way ministries might have been started by, somebody that just felt like, oh, this is something God wants me to do, which we do not discount in the least. But that doesn't by default make it the responsibility of the church then to pick up that ball and run with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can be called to something on an individual level and that not become the church's financial obligation, responsibility, and so yeah. And what you have often in churches is exactly this thing. Someone had a passion for someone. You'll hear it. We hear it all the time. Oh, that ministry was started by brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so. And, we've been doing that for 25 years. Well, what happened to brother so-and-so? Oh, he died 10 years ago. Like, all right. So he's gone on to glory. Can this ministry go on to glory also? And, very often the answer is, well, no, we got to continue the legacy of brother so-and-so, right? That you have no obligation to continue the yeses of people who have gone before you. You very well may do so, but it should be born out of your mission and vision and not out of a sense of obligation to do so. So, yeah, I think a little bit of bureaucratic red tape is okay. You don't want to make things too hard. AJ, a very simple thing that I used to do. I'm sure I'm not the only pastor in the world who's ever done this, but people would come up to me all the time and say, I have an idea for something. We really ought to do X, Y, Z. And so what I would always do in those, because they come up on a Sunday and then they just expect you to go, all right, well, let's just sit down right now and have this conversation.
Excited. Yeah, they're excited about it.
They're excited. So all I would do is say, this sounds amazing. I would love to explore that more with you. Send me an email. I'm so busy on a Sunday morning, I'm going to forget that we even had this conversation. Will you send me an email and we'll get a meeting scheduled and we'll talk about it? 9 times out of 10, that was the end. Like they're like, oh, I have to actually schedule I have to email you and then we have to have a meeting and then we have to talk.
Yeah. I'd probably make it even a little bit harder and say, put together.
Oh, there would have been other things on the back end of that, right?
Yeah.
But step one is email me and let's get a meeting scheduled. And you would be shocked at the number of people who that just clears out a lot because they're not as excited about it. If they're not excited enough about it to even email me on Monday and schedule a meeting, then it doesn't need to become my problem. So I would not even call that red tape, AJ, right? But I'm just, so I don't know. If you ever feel that pull, maybe on the disc, you're like an S or, so you just think, oh, I don't want to hurt someone's feelings. Don't let the words yes come out of your mouth when someone comes up with an idea on a Sunday morning to you. Say, you can be kind and say, this sounds amazing. I'd love to explore that more and talk more about that with you. Will you send me an email and we'll get a meeting scheduled to chat about what that might look like? You're going to clear off a lot of people because they're just not going to do that.
Yeah. Some people, it seems like they're like, you know what? That's awesome. They go back up on stage and turn their mic back on. Hey guys, we're going to start a new ministry.
We're going to start a new ministry. I just had a conversation in the hallway with. with Sister Sally, and when we're starting to,
The birthday cake ministry will maybe next Sunday will be our first day with it. Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Number 3 solution to the overcrowding of secondary ministries: tie some of the secondary ministries into primary ones. This kind of gets into one of a strategy that we work with churches in strategic envisioning when we're building out discipleship pathway, is making connection points between various secondary ministries back into a primary ministry. So primary ministry, again, is something that we want everybody engaged with. These are very limited. There's probably 3 to 5 of these happen in church. Very specific, high impact ministries, and things that maybe are similar or have come underneath something else. We could maybe connect that into a greater degree. And one example of this could be a bunch of Bible studies that happen. Again, maybe they're tossed in the bucket of women's ministry, men's ministry, young adult ministry, seniors, whatever it might be. And this is just an example. If we're a small church and we are like, okay, we got all these Bible studies and they happen, they've got 15 people in it and they do this and that. And you look at it and you're like, that kind of sounds like one of our small groups. Well, maybe that just needs to be a small group and not another thing. Maybe it should become part of our small group ministry instead of having what we say is a small group and then all these other Bible studies that really probably were started because somebody else just said, hey, I want to start a Bible study, and someone said yes to it. That's just one example of secondary ministry that could maybe change shape slightly and fit in nicely inside of primary ministry.
Yeah. Just think of it like you're just absorbing things into, you've got 2 glasses of water and you just kind of pour them into the same bucket, and now you've got a bucket of water. Congratulations. Like that that you can now instead of having but imagine it's not 2 cups of water. Imagine you've got 10 cups of water and you got to carry them all. If I can pour all those cups of water into one bucket, it's so much easier to carry one bucket than it is to carry 8 or 10 cups of water. And that's very often what we need to do. And then what happens is, if you had several different kinds of water or whatever, once you pour them all in the same bucket, they all kind of homogenize a little bit. And that's what you have to do. There has to be a homogenization process to make these things all kind of the same so that they really are one bucket and not 8 or 10 different individual classes. So maybe that's not a great example because I'm imagining now like lots of different kinds of drinks being poured into one bucket and it not tasting very good. So there's limits to the metaphor here, but just keep in mind, imagine trying to carry 10 cups versus carrying one bucket. And I think that's that's as far as you can take that metaphor and it still be helpful.
Yeah, that's a good visual though. All right. So there you go, Scott, a wrap on the issue of having too many secondary ministries in the church, distracting from your mission and vision, diffusing energy, causing confusion, adding layers of complexity that are just unnecessary, and converting that into a more simplistic design with greater attention given to high impact things, helping people to make decisions for where to spend their time, how they're going to engage with your church, with fewer things to choose from, that is going to give them a greater level of discipleship towards the pathway of becoming disciple makers themselves. So there's huge benefits to this. And we highly encourage you to take a look at your secondary ministries and see if you can slim down a little bit. Let's get a little lean and mean and really go after some significant in your community and around the world.
Yeah, that's right. So, hey, you can read today's show notes. This is an excerpt, a modified excerpt out of Strategic Disciple Making by Dr. Aubrey Malphurs. You can read this at malphursgroup.com/155. This is episode 155 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. And we'd just like to remind you that the Malphurs Group is a nonprofit ministry that resources churches around the world to make disciples and grow leaders. And in fact, all of the work that we do with churches outside of the United States, we do for free. And so when churches work with us in the United States, they pay affordable rates for things, and that directly funds the ministry that we're able to do overseas for free. So just thank you to I know that we have a lot of churches that we've worked with in the past that listen to the podcast, and I just want to say thank you. You may not have known it, but you were supporting an international ministry by doing that. But also, if you're an individual or a church and you're willing to take on a mission partner that is all about resourcing global pastors to make disciples and grow leaders, please get in touch with us. Go to malfirstgroup.com/donate or email us at leadership@malfirstgroup.com, and we'd love to chat with you. Thanks so much for joining us on today's episode of the Church Revitalization Podcast. We'll be back with you next week.